Hello and welcome to our Strasz Assessment Systems podcast, Beyond the Test, Strasz Talks. I'm Rory McCorkle and I'm your host, and excited about the episode today as we talk about some of what to expect in 2026 in the credentialing and testing industry. I'm really pleased to have with me my long term colleague in the industry, Andre Allen. Andre is the Chief Business Officer at the HR Certification Institute, or HRCI for short. Andre, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Rory. Greatly appreciate being here.
Well, thank you and appreciate you taking your time and for the wisdom that you're about to impart to our listeners here.
I don't know if it's wisdom. I have a lot of opinions, and you know what opinions are like.
Well, either way, we're gonna listen and hopefully has some takeaways from that today. So, Andre, as we always do, everyone in this industry has such different paths to how we got here. So, what was your path, and how did you end up in the assessment space?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And once again, thank you for having me here and the opportunity to tell this story and just, contribute to the testing industry with the few things I've learned over the years. And my path, like many, has been a crooked path, right? I didn't, go to school for assessment or psychology or psychometrics or even applied statistics. I'm a technology guy by pedigree. I'm a technologist. I like to build software. I like to write code. And it just so happened that I started working for an organization that was in the testing industry back in the 80s, a company called Reed Psychological Systems that did testing in the employment arena. It's mostly IO based testing. And the theory around that testing was more in the polygraph world, back when we were looking for ways to creatively screen people. And so as a result, I fell into developing software for scoring, you know, floppy disk based software that people would install. There was no downloading. You'd have to mail it to them in order to install that onto their PCs. And I started working there doing tech support. As well as, you had multiple jobs back then, so we did scoring over the phone. People would actually call in and read off answers from assessments, and we would type them into a mainframe like computer and read back a score, and then they'd move on with the hiring process. And I eventually moved into the technical arena, supporting customers and eventually building software. So definitely a crooked path, and I didn't really understand the nuance or the science behind what we were doing. I just knew it was pretty cool stuff, and I got to talk to some pretty coul people.
Well, and that's one of the things that I love about your background, Andre, because you, unlike a lot of us, started off in IO in talent assessment, and over the years have found yourself, on both sides of that line, and of course now solidly on the credentialing side of the equation with HRCI. So
Yes.
I know that depth of background adds some additional perspective as we look at what's coming up here.
It has. And, I've always been credentialing adjacent just because of my work with some of the professional organizations that I'm involved with. You always have a view into that world. But, for the first time in my career, I'm actually very hands on in that world. So it's good in a sense that everything's not completely new to me. But once again, how the sausage is made is always a different perspective. And so it was very, very good to sort of now get into the actual kitchen and be part of the process of credentialing.
Always. Well, and I know HRCI is most thankful to have you. So as we look ahead at this year in 2026, um, overall, of course, we've been through a heck of a set of changes the last 5 years between COVID, the advent of AI, its application, deregulation. We could go on and on and on with the
Yeah.
hot phrases, but as you really look ahead at going into this year, what to you feels kind of fundamentally different than, say, where the industry was even at a couple of years ago?
Yeah. Well, I have I'm going to sound like two different persons as I answer this question, right? As an insider, I understand the battles we fight in order to protect the integrity of credentials, the integrity of the assessments, the integrity of the measures, the fairness to people that take these assessments so that their credentialing means something. So I understand that plight. where we're at an inflection point, and we've been here for some time. I remember speaking about this maybe back in 2016 or 2017. The democratization of credentialing has created this weirdness in the market where we were once, as credentialing bodies, as testing bodies, the trusted voice of how a person demonstrates skill, is demonstrating credential capability, work capability, competency. And I don't know if the world believes that exclusively anymore. I believe there are points of view that say, hey, I can prove that I can do what I can do and I'm capable in many different ways. And you credentialing people, you measurement people only have one way. They haven't completely discounted us, but it's definitely diluted the perspective of what folks like us have done for many, many years and the science that we use to predict behavior, predict success, give opportunities for training, things like that.
No, and I appreciate that perspective because we've seen a lot of disruption. To your point, whether it's the big push by Burning Glass late last year to kind of democratize that process, other platforms that have looked to aggregate information about credentials. Naturally, you talking about credential holders and individuals a moment ago, but we've also seen some of that same trending with employers.
Yes.
And the Aspen Institute actually recently came out with a big study that just talked about some of the confusion in the employer space in this market of certifications, micro credentials, certificates, and all other ways to demonstrate these achievements. How do you see that landscape changing in 2026 and beyond?
There was a song that the Temptations came out with in the 60s called Ball of Confusion. And I think that song really represents the state that we're in right now because it gets even more complex when you start to look at it on an international basis, right? So if we just talked about North America, I can tell you that when you go into employers right now to sort of look at sort of the pedantic definition of credential versus certificate versus certification, they really can't conceptualize an intellectual difference between those. They say some company said you can do this, therefore I can believe it. And what validates that? We have companies that produce credentials that may not go through the same level of rigor that some of the older companies have gone through, and the market and employers trust it just because of the name attached to
Mhm.
them, right? So that's one of these things where the market defines value. It's like the value of a home. Internationally, because there's sort of less familiar with North American standards, you have a lot of individuals that just want to have any sort of thing to establish their ability. So you look at platforms like LinkedIn Learning and Coursera, people use those learning based certificates to establish that they have some skill. And frankly, some employers are okay with that. We just did at HRCI some focus groups with some C-level executives around this topic. And interestingly enough, they mentioned that they didn't necessarily, when it comes to HR professionals, they didn't necessarily care about the entry level person having all the credentials, right? They believe that when you enter into HR, because like this profession, many people fall into it accidentally, it's okay to learn as you go. But as you start to matriculate and promote into the manager, director, VP level, the credentials are important as a way of demonstrating competency or demonstrating learned skill through a certification. So yeah, it's just continuing to get more and more blurred, and as more companies start to use AI to create credible looking tools to validate credentials, it's going to be more and more confusing from the consumer standpoint.
Just to follow up on that, Andre, I'm curious because clearly you're encountering this with HRCI in the human resources space. How have you all been approaching trying to, let's say, dispel or clarify some of that confusion amongst your stakeholders?
you know some hills are worth dying on, right? And as a credentialing body with a history, we want to make sure that our credentials follow the rigor as set forth by ANSI and NCCA and all of the organizations that say this is what a good credential looks like. However, we've not ignored the fact that people are saying we understand that we want to be able to demonstrate our skill and our ability in other ways, right? And we're not um, falling deaf, giving deaf ears to employers that say, wait, I get the credentials are rigorous, but we need people right now to do certain things, and we're okay with us learning. So we have different ways to sort of allow people to demonstrate their skill, demonstrate learning. Our research person says busy people have busy people problems. And what you find is credentialing is not necessarily a learning intervention, it's more of a validation. So we're more looking towards how do we equip people just in time to sort of answer the problem for the next meeting that they're going into, for the next interaction that they're going to have, for the next negative thing. We've got a layoff, we got an office we've acquired. You've been charged with doing the HR stuff. How does that person become conversant in those things? So we're responding to it in both ways. We're not abandoning traditional certification or traditional assessment around certification or traditional measurement and the science behind that, but we're also responding to the fact that people want to establish competency in multiple ways.
Well, and I appreciate that pragmatic view because indeed a lot of organizations that we see in the space at times are not as responsive to some of those market forces. So glad to hear that you all have really taken that in from your stakeholders.
Yeah.
Um, you mentioned already AI twice, and so of
Here
course
we go. Yeah.
it wouldn't be a conversation about what's coming up without hitting good old AI. And last year we saw a lot more actual implementations, including, I might add, a few
Hmm.
from you all at HRCI,
Yeah. Yeah.
rolling out AI tools in operations, technology, customer support, knowledge management, and access. How do you see amongst the credentialing community? How do you see that trend continuing this year? And in particular, what are some of those key considerations, excuse me, that leaders like you should take
Yeah.
into account as this takes place?
Oh boy, get ready. Yeah, I can talk a long time on this topic, so you're going to have to govern me here. And for the record, I am an AI optimist, right? I am one that believes that the technology, while it's not there yet, it will eventually be, and it will eventually exceed our expectations, as every technology that we've had has been along the path. We've implemented some projects, and I think everybody's talked about the pet projects that they've implemented. A little bit of the creative side of AI to sort of start the creative process to help write items. I think that stuff is kind of like, okay, it's accepted, it's done. We really need to consider what does it look like to have AI as a real intelligence, as a real part of a team, right? Even though it may be a different type of intelligence, us specifically being HR, we're really trying to lead the charge of, okay, how does HR handle this new intelligence organization? How do you get it into the culture? How do you train it to not just spit out what it's learned, but spit out what it's learned in the context of how you do business, how in the context of how it operates within a team? So even training is something that HR has to consider different when it comes to AI, but that's a whole other conversation. I'm an AI optimist. So I would hope that as we move along in the credentialing industry, that while there is a boogeyman of getting things wrong, and I think we always throw out, you don't want to get sued, you don't want to get challenged, because there's been cases out there, but with every innovation, there's been those sort of challenges. I think finding creative ways within ethical guidelines to push forward, to continue to prove, to continue to refine, to continue to perfect, will create the greatest opportunity for new entrants in this industry, as well as making us as sort of the old guard much more technologically forward facing. We have great
Mm.
opportunity here.
Well, I completely agree, and hopefully, to your point about the market forces earlier, hopefully a bit more nimble in being able to respond to those factors as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Rory, because and if you don't mind me going off, it's not a tangent; it's related. Recently I've heard about the phrase that's out there. It's AI slop, right? So
Mhm.
that the AI produces slop. And I was having a dialogue with someone, and I said, "Well, okay, let's go back and let's also catalog the human slop, right? That comes in the creative process." I said because we tend to look at AI, or whenever there's a technology, we measure it through the perfection of what we've achieved today, right? AI falls short because it can't do what we're doing right now. But wait, as we were building up to what we were doing right now, there were a lot of scorched earth, damaged moments, mistakes, learning, all of those things. What we find though is that AI is able to do that faster. right? Whereas it
Mm.
takes us years to go through the iterations, AI can take an iteration and do it within days, hours, minutes. And so all I say is let's give AI the same opportunity to learn and develop the same way we learned and developed along the way while preserving the guardrails so that it doesn't hurt people. Because
Mm.
here's the other part of human slop: we've hurt people in the process too that we don't want to acknowledge. We can quickly point out when AI does something that hurts a person, but let's also remember all of the personal decisions that we made, individual decisions, non AI decisions that we made along the development path that were also detrimental, that we learned from, got better, and improved. So let's allow it the same capability.
I love that sentiment and would share it as a fellow AI optimist. So I appreciate that point of view, and hopefully people take that to heart as they continue to look at innovations within their own organization. Um, I'd like to pivot a bit, and there have been a lot of conversations over the last several years about the current, let's say, legal and regulatory environment that has been impacting credentialing and, in particular, licensure programs.
Yeah.
Naturally, being at a voluntary credentialing group, things look a little different for you, but I know there's still some effects, and would love to hear your thoughts on how, in particular, the current sentiments around regulation, but also to the point you raised earlier, this concept of trust are really affecting programs such as yours.
Yeah, and it's sort of waxes and wanes in terms of the government's sort of oversight of this, right? And I'm sure it's much more intense in certain industry than others. Right now, I'd have to imagine education is going through a lot in terms of this level of measurement and things like that when it comes to students. We've seen what our federal government has done in terms of Department of Education, but notwithstanding, when it comes to the commercial markets, for us, because we're volunteer, we find there's more adjacent effect from some of these things. It's not direct on as if it were like a CPA exam or an exam for the bar, where there's sort of direct state and oversight over these types of things. It's more, are we measuring people fairly? Is this a correct bar for entry? Was there a discriminatory process that was put in place? Right? Did we measure people, or is there adverse impact? And so those things don't go away.
Mm,
And those things have been sort of on the docket. And this is in the camp of why we do things the right way. Those are the pillars of why we do things the way we do them, right? To make sure that they don't have adverse impact and they're fair and reliable. But those questions come up. It's more about public trust and the public saying, hey, we don't want these organizations to be barriers to us entering into a field. And we prefer to be able to demonstrate our skill in other ways rather than through these tests and these certifications. It hasn't risen to a level of loud noise yet, but we've heard rumblings specifically in certain industries and certain professions that say, hey, to be a hair braiding person, I shouldn't have to take a certification to be this level. Why do I have to go through this process just to braid hair when I've been braiding hair? But you have a cosmetology exam. So don't want to go off on a tangent, but it's I don't want to give the it's all over the place answer, but unfortunately, I'm going to give the it's all over the place answer when it comes to this. And it's really, really industry specific. You're going to see much more intensity around those highly regulated, high stakes types of credentialing programs than you will around the voluntary programs. With us, our value comes from how much the public and employers feel our credential validates candidates and or current employees for promotion.
completely appreciate that perspective, and I also appreciate your emphasis on the public trust, because
Yeah.
the other, to your point earlier, the regulation certainly, or deregulation push, might vary from country to country, but that trust element tends to be consistent within some of the Western world at the moment.
Yeah. Well, it's still good internationally because what happens is, trust comes from adoption, right? So the
Mhm.
more people for us, the more executives that have our credential or retain their credential, right? The more people say, well, in order for me to achieve what that executive achieved, I should pursue that or similar credential, right? So it's a self-feeding sort of situation such that our own certification holders are the base of influence for new certification holders,
Mm.
right? So it's very important to us to make sure that our current certification holders are happy with their certifications, happy with their credentials, are revered in our network, part of our family.
Oh, I love that sentiment. I think that'll be a great take forward from this conversation, Andre.
Yeah.
Well, as we get close to bringing this to a close, I would love your ruminations on, what's the number one or number two. Make your own list here. Hard conversations that credentialing executives, leaders should be having that they might be uncomfortable with having or might be actively avoiding at this point.
Yeah, I think it's going to allude to a conversation I had earlier, but our credentialing people within our industry, we have to recognize that some of us sit at levels and layers within organizations at times where we're going to get told what to do versus leading the change. And
Mm,
where we're seeing things in HR, we're seeing CIOs, CEOs, CTOs, any CXO individual, they're telling the HR, the CHRO, you will do this. You will use AI for recruiting. You will use AI for screening. You will use these tools. And the hard conversation I want us to have is to make sure that while we are protecting the validity, the reliability, the academic rigor, there is a business requirement that, if we don't show up as a future looking, forward thinking leader on this topic, we will get told what to do.
mm.
We will get told what to do unequivocally, and then we'll also have to deal with the fallout of that high level decision. So to me, rather than dealing with both ends of the problem, let's be on the forefront of leading the change and helping to facilitate the adoption and the learning opportunity that'll come, versus just the resistance and the fear and the what ifs and the what abouts.
No, I couldn't agree more, and certainly something that the testing industry has not necessarily made a mantra of leading, as opposed to really being at times one of the latter kind of areas within the broader ecosphere to change. So I
Yeah,
really appreciate that sentiment, as well as the emphasis on both the validation piece of what we do as well as the educational aspect.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I so appreciate your time, Andre. Thank you for spending some time here with us and our listeners. I hope that this has been illuminating for those who have taken some time to listen and think about these things as they go into sketching out their 2026 work and strategic plans.
Well, glad to be here, and thank you to your audience for giving me an opportunity to spend a little time and share my thoughts. I always have a lot of thoughts about these types of topics.
Well, certainly hope that people take advantage of your presence in other industry contexts and continue to learn from your insights. And for our listeners, thank you for being with us today. As always, our next episode is out in 2 weeks, so please do keep a lookout for that. And in the meantime, be safe and be well. Take care.